I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear. The thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Thank you so much for letting me know your positions. As we just discussed, as of 10:46 this morning, the chief judge has decided to close all courthouses due to Hurricane Milton, both Wednesday, October 9th and Thursday, October 10. The court anticipates that operations will return to normal on Friday, October 11th, but that's due to the court's continued close monitoring of the impacts of the storm. Due to the potential storm and the ramifications of it, the court is going to postpone jury selection in this matter till Monday, October 14th at 9 a.m. Mr. Owens, please provide the court the order with regard to the clothing and shoes, and we'll address that as necessary. As also requested, please provide my judicial assistant your cellular telephone numbers before you leave today. With that, the court is in recess, and we will see you all on Monday, October 14th. Thank you.
Okay, so there you heard it. The Sarah Boone trial, which is jury selection is due to start today, postponed. Could you guys hear the audio okay with that? Any problems with the audio? So I must say, more the hurricane cuts close to home for me, just because I know someone who lives on the path. It's a really big storm. I also know someone who stays a little bit higher up in the path. I've got a school friend who owns property in Florida. So, you know, their concerns are definitely my concerns. I actually drove down, by the way, Northport as well, where the laundries stay. That is also on the west side of Florida, kind of a bit in the area of Tampa, and that is exactly the trajectory of this hurricane. I have actually said in the past I would actually like to cover, and it's quite interesting how this hurricane is now literally affecting true crime and true crime news. And I certainly have been thinking about starting to cover the climate as an important conversation one needs to have in terms of these cases. You might say, "Wow, aren't you kind of going off track here?" But if you think about it, just in a general sense, the weather, I believe, played a very important factor in the recovery of Lacey Peterson. Lacey and Connor's remains were found on San Francisco Bay immediately following huge storms. I've been thinking, could Summer Wells possibly be found, even Sebastian Rogers, if they were disposed in water following all of this hurricane, this large amounts of water, displacing everything. Could that lead to breakthroughs, for example, in those cases? But I certainly am just interested in, it's not so much just the news of it, but the denial of it. Just the thing of something's happening in the world and people say, what, there are hurricanes every year. I'm interested in how we deal with reality, and I think the climate is quite an interesting example of that. So anyone here want me to cover something like that, climate news update? Maybe we could do members only. I know not everyone is interested in that. But anyway, my thoughts are definitely, if you guys are watching, Debbie in Florida, I don't think my friend Jean really watches this channel, but I know he's got property over there. Friends of mine in Myrtle Beach, as soon as you've got these big storms, they can go all the way up to there with devastating consequences, as we've just seen in North Carolina. Anyway, let's go on to the next case, which is Lori Vallow. Are you guys aware that Colby Ryan has got a YouTube channel that he's recorded a call he made with his mother, and this is an excerpt from it.
Then I do 100% forgive you. I forgive you. And I'm not going to hold you in a jail cell of my heart, but you cannot be a part of my children's lives. And I think you need to understand why. Because you and I can't even be a part of each other's lives. Because I don't feel like I know you anymore. And I don't want to hurt you by telling you that, but I don't want to lead you on.
Now, Daybell did tell Ryan.
Okay, so that is Nate Eaton covering that whole kind of what do you call it? Not really an interview, but Colby talking to his mother. And I don't know about you, but I feel very weird about it. I feel very weird about Colby as a YouTuber interviewing his mother, who's a convicted murderer, for his YouTube channel, and kind of forgiving her on air, as it were, and dealing with this on social media. Now, I guess what I find weird about it is I don't mind, or I wouldn't have any problem with someone confronting and dealing with all of this, just that alone, right? But to do it on social media, something as private and personal as that, and make that into content for YouTube, I just find that very strange. For me, Laurie Vallow, and I actually attended the Laurie Vallow trial, is a very colorful but kind of crazy figure. And in this interview, she basically says that Tylee went off her meds and Tylee killed JJ by accident, and then she killed herself. That's kind of her latest sort of fruitcake scenario. And what do you guys say about this whole thing of a family member making a YouTube channel where they basically do what Colby's doing? And I'll tell you another reason why I find it a little bit strange is Colby testified in court and he barely said anything, right? Most of his testimony was really a telephone conversation that was played back. So something that I found disappointing when I attended trial was the people who were supposed to say what had happened, the people who were kind of involved, Melanie Gibb, but especially family members, had absolutely the least to say about anything. And I found that, as I say, really disappointing. And because, you've got family that have been murdered, and then you've got family members that really have got very little to say in court. And now suddenly they've got quite a lot to say on social media. So the court of public opinion matters, but the actual court doesn't. I don't know, I think that's a bit effed up. So you might say, yeah, but who are you to, you talking about cases and, isn't it exactly the same thing? I don't think it is the same thing. I don't think it is the same thing to have a family member in prison for murder and you calling them. And where does the line then, where then is the line between your personal relationship with your own mother and, how can I put it, turning that into true crime content, I guess, right? And I would say, it is important to confront all of this sort of thing, but to make it into content, like to film yourself doing it, there's a totally different way one could do it. You could write a book about it and sort of privately deal with it and do it in that way, in a very sort of, where you concentrate and you are in a space that you can think about it. But to make it like a public display, all of that, I don't know, I find it I find it's adding to the cacophony of craziness that we're seeing in true crime, right? Isn't it really bizarre for you guys? Okay, so that's that. We've dealt with Sarah Boone. By the way, I'm probably not going to cover the Sarah Boone case. I might cover 1 or 2 court days, and I might do little package snippets, but I'm very likely not going to cover the trial. Okay, so that's my position on that particular trial, but that is supposed to be starting up in about a week's time. Anyway, our thoughts are certainly with the folks in Florida. Definitely a difficult time of the year at the moment. Okay, so now I'm going to go from that to Madeleine McCann. Anyone know the news in the Madeleine McCann case? So there's an article from Sky News. So the defense lawyer for Christian B, so they're basically presenting closing arguments. They've reached the end of his trial, and of course, he's not been charged with anything related to Madeleine McCann. And so it's quite interesting, the closing arguments that they presented. By the way, look at this picture of him. Anyway, so what they say here is quite interesting. His defense lawyer says, this story will teach us what terrible consequences it can have when the investigating officers lose the necessary emotional distance from a case, and this attitude is combined with disastrously amateur investigations. And what he's talking about here is he's saying, is accusing the German police of losing perspective because they fixated on this idea that we have solved one of the biggest mysteries kind of European cases. What happened to Madeleine McCann? Who's responsible for what happened to her? And I think that's actually an excellent point, that I even think that the German police are a bit cuckoo in this regard. I don't think Christian Bruckner's got anything to do with it. And so I would agree that the German police seem to have completely lost touch with reality with regard to this particular perpetrator. Sometimes I think that they've done it on purpose just to pressurize him, that they don't actually believe that he did this. They're just trying to pressurize him. But at other times, I think they do genuinely think that they've made some kind of breakthrough. Again, if they did think that, why is he not being charged? So it is kind of strange. So have a look at this. Your decision to prosecute would have been different if the accused had not been Christian B, the man to whom you also want to attribute an offense. Right? I think that this is so well put, because that's exactly what has happened. Now, I'm certainly not a defender of Bruckner. I don't think he's a salt of the earth human being. I don't think he's innocent. I do think he didn't commit any crime against Madeleine, but I do think this is quite true. Your decision to prosecute would have been different if the accused had not been Christian B, the man whom you want to attribute an offense which has attracted the attention of the world public, and it has. If you think about it, this is a German perpetrator who's being tried in a German court, and almost every time there's some kind of development, there's a news story in a British publication going, Madeleine McCann, prime suspect, and then a story about something that's got nothing to do with it. And this has been happening for about 2 years. Madeleine McCann, prime suspect, answering blah, blah, blah about XYZ. Nothing about the Madeleine McCann case. Again, Madeleine McCann, prime suspect, and on and on and on. And what do they say? It's lain like a fog over these proceedings. And that's precisely true. That is absolutely true. And of course, he still hasn't been charged with this particular case. And I just want to deal with this as well. So there's some other things that are even flimsier, which is that someone who accused him of committing a crime against her, it sounds like rape, but minus the G, even that case fell away. And what's quite interesting is it seems to have fallen away because this lady was so caught up in the Madeleine McCann coverage that she thought, yes, that's the guy. And then she said that there's a tattoo on the perpetrator. Well, it turned out he doesn't have that tattoo. I don't know if it was removed, but surely you can tell if a tattoo has been removed. So look at this. In his closing speech, Bruckner's lawyer accused two main prosecution witnesses of lying about videotapes they claim to have seen, allegedly showing him doing that, right? So they were saying, even in this case, they were saying, we've got irrefutable proof. There's videotapes of these crimes happening, except they failed to deliver on them. I've really been watching this case from a distance, not particularly interested in it, just like, okay, what are you guys going to come up with next? And the thing I noticed was a lot of the witnesses against him were his own ex-friends. That's not a particularly credible witness ever. To have an inmate saying, I heard this, I saw this. A credible witness is kind of a member of the public or a family member or something like that. But an inmate as your star witness is never really going to be particularly useful. There have been cases where inmates have testified, but with dubious results. Casey Anthony is one that I can think of. Another one is the Chris Watts case. What did he say about this person and that one? And another one is Patrick Frazee. That's a rare example where I think that actually did have some merit. But generally, there's always some opportunism and some angle from the inmate. You know, they're down on their luck and they will say certain things. Has there been anything like that in the Alec Murdoch case? I know there have been some jailhouse calls, but I can't think of much beyond that. Do you think of any other cases where cellmates, inmates have provided testimony? Wasn't there something with Jodi Arias as well? Yeah, that's exactly it. If they are your star witnesses, I would say your case is in serious trouble. Okay, so then I just want to finalize. The lawyer suggested former Irish holiday rep, this lady, had been wrong to identify Christian B as the man who committed this crime in her room in 2004. She had described her attack as having a distinctive cross-like mark on his right thigh, but he had no such marking, the judge was told. Now, could be that she made an error in terms of her memory, but it could also be that, well, let me just deal with the next sentence here. Ms. Bien may have been influenced by media stories about Christian B after it was reported that he was the Madeleine suspect in 2020. Well, I think that is absolutely the case. In order to nail him, they got this lady who was in, I think, Praia de Luge, to associate him with Madeleine McCann and then accuse him. And it turned out that her testimony about the cross-like mark on his right thigh, well, it wasn't him. So, you know, it's like bias. I want him to be the monster. I want him to be the perpetrator. But is there any evidence to prove it? So I do think the German authorities have tried to create bias. They have created bias, and that has actually backfired on them. So so it remains to be seen what is going to happen here. I don't think he's innocent by any means. Are they going to be able to attach some of these latest charges to him? I think this sort of thing where he has been falsely accused by at least one person creates doubt. I think there is a bit of a witch hunt going on with regard to him. Also, where there's smoke, there's fire. You know, he's not a innocent lamb either. So I wonder whether he will be found guilty of some of the charges, but not all of them. But I mean, the biggest question of all is, after this, is he going to be charged in terms of the disappearance of Madeleine McCann? I would think not. I would think not. How long has it been that they've been bleating about all of this and nothing's come out of it? Saying things like, we've got video evidence of X, Y, and Z, and then you have a trial. Well, where's the video evidence? And you never produce it. It's not a good look. Okay, so they are urging the judge to jail him for 15 years. He's already been in prison for 7. He's serving a 7-year sentence. We'll see what happens with regard to that. Incidentally, we're speaking briefly about climate at the beginning of this. Did you know that there were activists who threw bean soup, I think it was, onto a Van Gogh painting? They were sentenced to 2 years in prison. Do you think that's a fair sentence? I kind of discussed that on an episode of Van Gogh Letters. Anyway, we're going to now move to some quite interesting additional news. We'll try and go through it quite quickly. Starting off with this story. Have any of you guys seen this story? It's from Fox News. It's dealing with a body language expert saying that the laundry parents' first police encounter, they were fair to question kind of what was going on. Let's just listen into some of this. It's the famous van. I've actually been to this address myself earlier this year. This is obviously Northport, Florida, right? On the west coast.
Describing something with your hands and you're looking for them when they're in sync. So he has these very large expressions, right? We call this outside of our presentation zone. We usually speak within this area. When we are out here, that's what we call into our second, third circle. That is something you really want to pay attention to, because he's got these very sweeping gestures, which is really interesting, because when you think about personality type, this is a person they feel is a threat. So you can see his hand extending out before he's actually reaching the police officer, because he doesn't want to come in close contact with him to where they are more in what we call.
I must always find, I don't know, sorry to be a little bit condescending, but I always find professional body language people kind of curious. She's now analyzing the cop's body language. Why is that necessary? Why do you need to look at the cop's body language? I mean, is he under investigation here? Anyway, it's just
that personal zone. He's staying way off into.
So I just want to deal with kind of what she's speaking about here, where she says, it's absolutely right that in a situation like this, you shouldn't talk to the police. It's absolutely right. Everyone in the public should do the same thing. And I've heard a lot of people saying this. I've heard a lot of people saying, you know what? If I was in that situation, everybody should know, when the police come to you, don't talk to them, lawyer up, that kind of thing. And I'm kind of like...
Let's head to the White House. Peter Doocy is asking questions.
Every time I hear that, I kind of think, isn't this a true crime channel? And isn't a true crime channel about telling the truth? And isn't a true crime channel about justice? And isn't this a case where someone was murdered? And you saying the right response here is to not talk to the police, to not cooperate, almost like what happened in the Ramsey case, where you had the situation, a crime was committed, and then there's this long period of lawyers that are in the way, and then ultimately in that case, things just fizzle away. And 28 years later, we're still talking about that case. In this case, you had pretty much the same thing. The lawyers come into the picture, and then everything just fizzles away, and there's a settlement behind. And people are saying, yeah, that is the right way of dealing with it. Now, I understand from a particular perspective, you might say, that's the right thing for me to do, right? So the police come knocking at your door, get a lawyer. That's the right thing for me to do. Is it the right thing in terms of society or for justice? You might say, I don't really care. It's the right thing for me to do. But think about the other side of this. Gabby Petito was supposed to be the laundry's daughter-in-law. She wasn't just some random human being that was murdered. It's not just that someone was accusing Brian of murdering someone that they didn't even know. This was someone that lived with them under their roof, right? This was someone who was going to be, as I say, their daughter-in-law, and I think that they sort of considered her in a way their daughter, right? But then as soon as she's dead, she doesn't have any value. She doesn't have any meaning. She's just not worth anything. And then all the sort of loyalty goes back to Brian. That's the part where I think is more than a little disingenuous. And I also think what this shows, in a sense, because Brian did murder Gabby, right? And if Brian did murder Gabby, do you also want to lawyer up, and do you also want to protect him? Ultimately, if the parents had said, Brian is here, Brian, I think you need to talk about what has happened, because we don't even know. That could actually have saved Brian's life, in terms of if they loved him, that sort of facing reality could actually have saved his life, because in the end, Brian took a coward's way out. So I don't know. I definitely feel very differently about it. I think if you, I don't know, it's one of those things where it's almost 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I want to protect myself. I don't care about society. Okay, well, then what are we doing in true crime? Shouldn't everybody lawyer up? And if you've committed a crime, you should try and find some way to protect yourself at all costs. At what point do you say there's the right thing to do, and then there's the best thing to do? So you might say the best thing to do is to lawyer up. Isn't the right thing to do to kind of tell the truth? And then you may say, okay, but when it comes to family members, blood is thicker than water and all that kind of thing. Well, I must say, I guess none of us ever want to be in that situation, right? Let's have a look at some of your comments. Boo Sheet says, I was blown away at how that it did seem that way, didn't it? I do know about that case. I've got to tell you, I know and follow a lot of cases. There are only some that I can cover, actively cover. And I wish there were more of me that I could cover more of them. That is kind of what Crime News Update is about, so that you can cover some news lightly, but cover a lot more of them. I must say the Kentucky sheriff one probably is one that I should have covered today. Okay, so let's go on to, is there anything else to mention regarding this article? Let's have a look. It's really the wrong story there. She says, it's fair to question whether the laundries knew more than they let on, but it was also proper for them to heed the advice of their attorney. Was it? Because ultimately they were sued. Was it proper for them to do that? And so I guess the question is, what would you do if this happened to you? What would you do if this happened to you? If your own child was accused of murder, what would you do? Let's see what some of you guys say. We are going to talk about the Titan, but you might want to come back in about half an hour if that's what you're waiting for. What would you do if this happened to you? Would you lawyer up, or would you talk to the police? Okay, so now we're going to go to Backlash regarding a premiere in Poland, of all places. So they that to me, that's good to hear, and that's a good response. You can lawyer up and cooperate, right? So the think about just how, like, in my opinion, this is so disingenuous. They're going to premiere the Rust movie in Poland, right? And when they do that, they're going to honor Helena Hutchins. This is all about, this is a tribute to Helena. So the movie in which she was killed, there hasn't even been kind of a proper trial covering everything that happened. Someone who was involved in that wiggled out of it. Oh, and now you're going to have a movie premiere that honors Helena. I really wonder if Helena herself were alive, and they said, these people that didn't testify or didn't whatever, they want to give you this incredible tribute. Where you were shot dead and you died. They want to use that same thing, which is actually all about them, which is all about their project, right? That they want to see the light of day. And they're going to use that as a vehicle to honor you, right? How do you feel about that? I think if I was her, I would say I'd rather not be honored in that way. I'd rather not that this movie basically becomes a tribute to me. I've done lots of other things, right? I just think it's really, really bad taste. And anyway, let's read a bit more about it. The Camera Image Festival that's in Poland faces criticism for honoring Helena Hutchins with the Rust screening. So it's taking place in Turin, Poland, and the premiere is billed as a tribute to Hutchins, right? And it's a very obscure location. I mean, they're starting to release this film in Poland, of all places. And so, they say, following the screening, there'll be a special panel featuring director Joel Souza, cinematographer Bianca Klein, who completed Hutchins's work. And then they say, this intention, though noble, has raised eyebrows and concerns within the filmmaking community, as I think it should. And this is the part that stands out. Prominent figures, Oscar-nominated cinematographer Rachel Morrison, she's voiced dismay on social media, expressing feelings against memorializing Hutchins through the promotion of the film where her work ended so tragically. She talks about the ethical dilemma of celebrating Hutchins's life by showcasing the very production that led to her death. I must agree with that 100%. And can you see that there's a similar kind of thing? I feel a similar sense of discomfort with Colby Ryan turning his sort of interactions with his mother into social media fodder to what we see here. It seems like something else is happening. Like, although that is happening, it seems like something else is happening when that's happening. Same thing with this. I don't think this is really about a tribute to Helena. It's actually about trying to get a film into the door. It's like trying to find a way to get the film on the conveyor belt so people can start watching it, right? And so what does she say? Rachel Morrison says, I'm all for memorializing Helena, but not by screening and promoting the film, right? And then other cinematographers have said the same thing, right? They say, are you kidding me? This reads like an Onion headline. So there are a lot of people that are not happy with what happened on the Rush set and with the legal reality as well. I'm one of them. And so should this movie be set free and made money and basically implying that even Helena is looking down, smiling and saying, I'm so glad what happened here. All the people here are wonderful. You guys may remember that I actually covered a big interview that Joel Souza gave and then whenever he had his talk about the details, he said, I don't really want to talk about that. And he kind of gave that exclusive, I think the day after Alec Baldwin was acquitted. I mean, he really didn't waste any time. Would you guys like me to still cover part 3 in that? I've only covered part 2 of that exclusive that Joel Souza gave. I never actually finished that, but I would like to finish it. Is there anyone here that wants me to still deal with that? Not here, but certainly covering it. So Audra K says, I don't think that the movie should be released at all, and definitely not as a tribute. Yeah, I agree with that. I, for one, probably won't watch the film. I certainly won't pay to watch it. If there was justice in this case, that might be a little bit different. But I feel like I don't want to reward the people involved in that production, any of them, because I think there was a lot of injustice in that particular case. Okay, just have a look at, is there anything else to talk about here? So the other side of the story is Bianca Klein, who did the cinematography, said, one of the things about the film is nobody knows anything about Helena. I don't know if that's true. Everyone just knows about her death, and that's sad because Helena was so much more. The Camera Image Festival has aimed to create a meaningful tribute, but the intense backlash highlights the complicated intersection of remembering Hutchins and the film industry's responsibility for safety. So it'll be interesting to see if this backlash continues. Is support eventually, is Alec Baldwin sort of support base eventually going to win through? Is this whole, how can I put it? Is this whole enterprise, is the momentum going to just sort of roll over, or what's going to happen? It's going to be interesting to see what does happen. Okay, so now we move on to the Karen Reed trial. Okay, do you guys know what's happening there? So the state's highest court schedules dismissal arguments. Let's do that. By the way, I don't know this for a fact. I've sort of also been following the Karen Reed trial and the aftermath to it, but I've not really been following it breathlessly, every single detail. But I did read somewhere, and so what I'm saying, I don't know if it's 100% accurate. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some truth in it, but I certainly haven't gone to a lot of trouble to check it. But I heard somewhere that she's mortgaged her house, or she'd sold her house to pay for her defense. Whether that's true or not, I think it's unavoidable to assume that her legal bill has got to be immense. You know, the amount that this trial has cost her financially is probably huge. huge amount. And whatever happens, whether she's acquitted, whether she's found not guilty, that is definitely a price that she's paying for everything that's happened. Anyway, let's have a look at this report. The state's highest court will hear arguments next month whether to dismiss 2 of the 3 charges against Karen Reed, and that is scheduled for November the 6th. Reed is accused of drunkenly and intentionally hitting John O'Keefe. You may remember there's even audio of her saying, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. I think there were 3 or 4 different witnesses who said they heard her saying that. And she's, as far as I know, again, I haven't followed this very, very closely. Mostly I just come across Jennifer Coffindaffer's posts on X. And as far as I know, her defense, I think, is changing from the dog bit her, the dog bit him, creating those gashes, to, I think, some construction worker or some guy who was operating the snowplow, that is what could have happened. Now, bear in mind what the defense learned and what was proffered at trial was that there was no dog DNA in any of those wounds, which is quite compelling. Now, you'd think if a dog savaged this guy, there's got to be some evidence of the dog, a dog hair, dog saliva, dog DNA. Of course, there's no evidence of it. And now the defense apparently, as I understand, may have changed to the snowplow dude may have bumped into him without knowing it or something like that. Something else I saw was a exhibit where they show all the fragments of glass and how they kind of in like the sort of sharp configuration of it next to the wounds on his arm. I thought that was quite an interesting exhibit. The interesting thing with what she's charged with is drunkenly and intentionally hitting John O'Keefe. Drunkenly and intentionally. And so, do you guys remember what happened? Jurors reached an impasse, which resulted in a mistrial. And so, Reed's retrial is scheduled for January. Okay, so that's that. Now we go to Mike Lynch from the Bayesian Super Yacht. I think I'm doing quite well. All of this is so far under an hour. I'm going to try and get through all of this in under an hour. So not particularly news. You know, Mike Lynch died from drowning. That's not really news. His daughter, her cause of death is still under investigation. Also not news necessarily. The part that I just want to highlight, so it's the 4th of October. It's a very new story where they say the Bayesian super yacht disaster is still under investigation, and then they say this. Inquests into the deaths of the 4 British nationals were opened and adjourned at Ipswich Coroner's Court. Now, before I continue, there's something I briefly want to talk about here, but before I forget, when someone has been found dead and there's not necessarily a foul play element, right? It seems accidental or something. There is nevertheless an investigation that takes place, just as we've seen with the Titan submersible. I'm going to get to that in a second. As soon as someone's body has been found, and if the police deal with the case and they say, okay, it doesn't look like this is our jurisdiction, essentially, it doesn't look like there was foul play here. There's nevertheless an investigation. And that is, I think, something to think about in the Madeleine McCann case. If Madeleine McCann's body is ever found, that's number one. And number two, if there's ever some sort of legal acceptance that Madeleine McCann is no longer alive, what do you think will happen? Let's see if you guys are following what I'm getting at. Wow, that's interesting. Michelle Troconis is a hearing on her contempt charges. Okay. Joe says, I still can't believe the Baldwin trial. Yeah, it is unbelievable. I must say, I'm also still very disappointed with the outcome there. So let me ask that again. In terms of Madeleine McCann, if her remains are found, which I don't think they ever will be, but if they were found, what do you think would happen? And we saw something like that in the Nora Corrin case. I wrote a book about that. It's a very good analogy to what could have happened in the Madeleine McCann case. So either her remains might be found and then something would happen, or someone might say, okay, you know what? She's been missing now for 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. Normally the law recognizes that someone is no longer alive by about 7 years. Sometimes they can speed that up if the circumstances are dire, like someone disappeared when a hurricane moved through. It seems obvious what had happened. But in Madeleine McCann's case, she's been missing for 17 years. And the absurdity of that whole thing is, oh no, she's somewhere, she doesn't know who she is, and she's living happily ever after. She just doesn't know who she is. So let's just see what you guys say. Well, no, it's the opposite. If Madeleine is declared dead, the investigation wouldn't end. The investigation would start. There'd be a brand new investigation called an inquest, right? What does Dan say? Wow, I thought this was so obvious. Yeah, they would. So literally, they would have a dead body. They would have evidence that someone had died, and so they'd have to reinvestigate, right? They'd have to basically look at the evidence and say, first of all, the police would look at it and say, what does this seem? What can be determined from this, right? And if there seem to be, I don't know how there wouldn't be anything. Anyway, let me not go into that. But the point is, it would lead to an inquest, and that would then lead to an investigation. And so for as long as Madeleine is alive, you're not going to have an inquest. So think about that. Who benefits from Madeleine not actually being investigated? Who benefits from that? Who benefits from this idea that maybe she's still alive? And what's also interesting with the remains of Suzanne Morphew, they found her remains. She'd been deceased, I think, 3 years, and actually found, you could call it sedative medication, or you could call it, they found chemicals in the marrow of her bone. Still, those chemicals were there that I think are very indicative of the circumstances of her death and beyond that. Now, could you have something similar to that in the Madeleine McCann case? I doubt it, but I'm just saying, when the remains are found, it can lead to a whole new investigation. And often the remains provide valuable intel on, it kind of gets the investigation back on track, and you have that sort of situation. The other side of it is, if Madeleine has been missing for 17 years and then becomes 20 years and becomes 30 years, at what point do you say, legally, we need some closure here? Let's say you're talking about an inheritance. Should a provision be made that Madeleine, who might be alive, inherits a portion of an estate? Then you might say, if you're a potential benefactor, you might say, that's not fair. Madeleine isn't alive, and so I shouldn't be getting a reduced share because that just doesn't make any sense. I'm just saying that there's a legal scenario where that whole question might be brought into play, where we, for certain reasons of legal efficacy, you need to apply kind of common sense. And if the legal, if that legal scenario ever develops, and they say, okay, we need to declare Madeleine dead, that would lead to an inquest as well. So, well, I say that I'm pretty sure it would, but I don't know if it's absolutely guaranteed. But I'm just saying it's interesting that even legally, Madeleine is still basically recognized as being still alive. I mean, how likely and probable do you think that is? By the way, I don't believe that that's the case. I saw a YouTuber taking one of my videos and saying that's what he thinks happened. That's not what I think happened. By the way, just FYI. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Ocean Gate, and then we're going to deal with, if there's time, we'll deal with something else. Oh, hold on, just before I move on, this is what I wanted to highlight here. For reasons yet to be ascertained, the Bayesian yacht sank rapidly. And this to me is why I'm covering this story. It's a really simple question. Why did this super yacht sink so quickly? If it didn't sink so quickly, 7 people wouldn't have died, right? 5 people died in the Titan submersible that also imploded suddenly. And it was supposed to be strong, right? Made of strong material. Same thing here. The craft that was supposed to be state of the art didn't just sink in a storm when another boat right next to it didn't. It sank rapidly. And so there's something quite mysterious about what's going on here. You know, whether it's engineering or the weather or human error or combination, it just would be very interesting to find out what really happened here. And like the Everest disaster, it's quite strange. There were a lot of people present, and yet you can't kind of get the story straight about exactly what is going on. So what I'm trying to say is, although there are lots of witnesses, their stories seem to be kind of different. And so it makes this quite a strange mystery. And it's quite, again, a very simple question. Why did this huge yacht sink at all, let alone why did it sink so rapidly? Okay, so now let's go to Ocean Gate. I don't think there's any doubt that there are going to be lawsuits. I think there's already a big lawsuit from the family, I think, of PJ Nargile. I think it's a $50 million lawsuit or something like that, but it's pretty big. So from his estate, that's already come out. Let's just have a look at this. I thought this was just narrated very well by the author of this article, William J. Broad. Just listen to this. He talks about how all of this started. He says, it happened in, can you guys read that? It happened in 2017 at the Scuttlebutt family pub down by the docks in Everett, Washington. Just steps from where OceanGate was building a new kind of undersea craft. The low-cost submersible was to be so large and strong that it could take 5 people down miles to see the Titanic up close. At the pub, Stockton Rush, the company's CEO, was having lunch with a new employee who had raised questions about the dive's skirting rules meant to improve safety at sea. Rush bristled. If regulatory scrutiny came up, he would buy a congressman and make the problems go away. And that was according to the testimony of Matthew McCoy. I've never really touched on that particular testimony about Rush saying, I'll just buy a congressman to deal with this. And that was on the last day of the Coast Guard inquiry. And then it goes on to say, marine experts who analyzed McCoy's testimony praised it as casting new light on the roots of the Titan disaster and possibly aiding lawsuits and other legal actions against OceanGate. The company has suspended its commercial operations. They talk here about they're creating a legal record that will help anybody who wants to go after OceanGate. There it is. I thought it was 50 million. Quite a good memory, right? $50 million lawsuit against OceanGate from Paul-Henri Nargelet. Interestingly, I don't know if you guys know, there was a couple who were suing OceanGate at the time that it imploded, basically because I think they were from Florida, and I think it was a husband and wife who had, I think, each paid $250,000. I think they've also gone into space, so quite wealthy people. And so I think they collectively paid $500,000, but they'd never been able to go down to the Titanic. It was postponed and whatnot. And then after the implosion, they just let it go. So one wonders whether they'll rejuvenate or resuscitate that lawsuit if they were paying attention to this hearing. I also think the whole mission specialist thing is kind of legal trickery in a sense as well. Okay, anyway, that's that. Well, I'm just under an hour. There's another story I want to touch on that is probably going to be a bit controversial, but let's do it anyway. So I previously spoke a little bit about social media, and I'm talking about I covered social media, the news media as well. How is true crime covered in the media? And I have to say, I think the best example of the worst example is Madeleine McCann in the British media. I think it's absolutely pathetic. And I was actually really impressed by how bad the British media covered the disappearance of Jay Slater. Nicola Bulley wasn't a lot better, but it is interesting how the British media don't seem to be able to look in the mirror at their own coverage. In this analysis, I've spoken about Colby Ryan, covering his mother's crimes but doing it like in a very public way. And then what was the other thing? Also the whole Rust thing, where you're going to use PR to sort of clean wash that whole thing. But what about just generally social media? I found this article. There'll probably be some people who say, well, I don't like Hillary Clinton, but this is not about her. It's about what she's talking about. So have a look at this. She says, she warns that allowing free speech on social media means we lose control. Now, you might say, and please forget about who's saying this. It's not about where it's coming from. It's about the idea. So think about this idea. Should social media be controlled? And I can almost intuit 90% of people who are on social media, who consume social media, would say, no, hands off, don't control social media. But I think if you're sensible and intelligent, you would say there can't be unlimited free speech, right? And think about mass shooters. Can someone go to school and say, I intend to do this, and not get into trouble? You know what I'm saying? Can someone who wants to commit a crime like that make YouTube videos about what they want to do? No. There's certain things that are not and should not be permitted, right? And the law has been quite slow to catch up to social media. And I just want to go through this article. I'm going to watch the numbers that are of you watching this. I'm pretty sure it's going to start dropping maybe from 100 to 50. I wouldn't be surprised. But this is what I want to deal with. So Hillary Clinton went on to CNN and they spoke about steps that could be taken at state level to regulate social media. And she was saying she wants to see more done by the federal government to moderate content. And she said, we can look at the state of California, the state of New York. I think some other states have also taken action. And then she says, and the reason I think this has got some validity is Hillary Clinton is a lawyer. She knows the law. And she says, look at this. At the top of every legislative political agenda, she's saying this issue should be at the top of every legislative political agenda. I actually agree. I think this should be one of the most important issues right now of our time, because literally you can have elections decided by fake news and by social media platforms that are totally out of control, where you can say anything. And you might say, well, just freedom of speech should be free, but even if you're lying and deceiving, you have the right to lie and deceive, and so may the best man win. Or is it may the worst man win? I don't know. You should allow the possibility for the worst man to win. That's how democracy should work. Should they? Should they work that way? So I personally am very worried about this. I actually think it's too little too late. I think this should have been sorted out 4 years ago. The fact that it's not been sorted out, we could be in serious, serious trouble very, very soon. Another thing that I've got to add when I'm dealing with this should impact true crime. So there are people right now in true crime that are actively defaming people. There are people in true crime that are, how can I put it, just maliciously spreading content that's not true or demonstrably true, and they're making a lot of money out of it. They are literally making money out of allegations, right? Allegations that don't have any evidence to back them up. And some of you watching will say, "Wow, that is definitely not true. It's the opposite of what you're saying." So, a really good example is Nicole Kessinger. So, the evidence that Nicole Kessinger, according to these YouTubers, murdered other people is that there's a ping. The ping near the Watts home is evidence that Nicole Kessinger murdered somebody. I can tell you now, Karen Reed was right by the John O'Keefe home when he was killed. Is that enough for her to be convicted of his murder? It's not nearly enough. The fact that she was there, it's important evidence that she had access and opportunity and all that kind of thing. It's not nearly enough evidence. And yet on YouTube and in social media, oh no, a ping is sufficient, and because I don't really like her, that's more than enough. Well, the law doesn't see it that way. And so why are you allowed to make a case like that in a court of public opinion when you couldn't make a case like that in court? If you took that to trial, wouldn't even get to trial, it would be thrown out. And so should the public be allowed to make these kinds of statements? Should they be allowed to make these kinds of statements? And I'm sure 90% of YouTubers would be howling, like, how can you say that? You're a YouTuber yourself. Do you want guardrails? Yes, I actually do want guardrails. Yes, I do. I do want them, right? And I can tell you now, if those guardrails are set in place, it would probably wipe out probably 80% of the true crime creators that are out there, because so many of them are opportunists that are grifters. Basically, they find out what you want to hear, what the public want to hear, and they tell you what you want to hear over and over and over again. Is it factual? Is it honest? Is it evidence-based? What do you think the answer is, right? So going back to this article, Clinton said this issue should be at the top of every legislative political agenda. She's called for the repealing of Section 230 of the Communications Act, which protects online platforms from being held liable for third-party content, such as user content on social media. So what will happen if that falls away? Well, those social media platforms will be responsible, and they will then make us responsible. And that's exactly what needs to happen. You need to have more responsible third-party content. You need to have more responsible user content on social media. The same laws that apply to you in the street and to journalism need to apply to social media. So have a look at that. This immunity applies to the content itself and the removal of content in certain circumstances. So am I calling for more censorship and more rules and more guidelines in social media? Absolutely, that is what I'm calling for. Absolutely. And I think you need to look around at other social media platforms and look at those, or ask them, do you think there should be more rules in terms of social media? And I want to encourage you to go to certain other, or your favorite true crime creator, right? I want to encourage you to go to your favorite true crime creator and go and look at the disclaimers on their channels where they say, this content is for entertainment only. My content can't be blah, 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 and all of that. All of that is to cover me telling you things that is not true, right? I've got a very simple disclaimer. When I provide analysis, I just provide the source where I get the analysis, and you can, if you like, you can accuse me of jumping to opportunistic conclusions about it, and I'll be happy to defend them. I'll be happy to say, I think what I'm saying is absolutely reasonable and defensible and credible, and anyone else would come to the same conclusion. I'm happy to take that on. So also you could say, where did you get this information? Did you just suck this out of your thumb? No, this is where I got it. And I don't need disclaimers for that, right? I do want to encourage you to go to your favorite true crime creator and have a look at these lengthy disclaimers that go on and on and on about I can't be held liable for what I'm saying. And that is why this legislation needs to be put in place for that opportunism that is taking place. Let's go through a little bit more of this. We should, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave, platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. Of course, they should be judged. You know what? We are starting to see social media literally wring the neck of court cases. Like, you're literally starting to see social media determining the outcome of trials. You're literally starting to see the entire narrative of a case that's bound for court kind of wriggling through the wormhole created by social media. Look at the Brian Koberger case. You've got to change the venue. You've got to change the judge. And all of this, like the whole trial becomes squeezed into this little jar. And even the jurors have got to be sequestered so that they don't get contaminated by social media. There's another way of dealing with this, that the court isn't subservient to the great colossus of social media that is better than, the court of social media is better and bigger than the actual court. It should be the other way around. The court, the actual justice system, should be the thing that we believe in and trust in, and social media simply provides a commentary on that. Not that social media decides who's guilty and who's innocent. Uneducated, mostly uneducated people on social media. And I'm not saying that social media doesn't matter. Social media, in a way, is us, right? Social media is society. It does matter. But you can't have us becoming the tyranny of whether you decide whether someone's guilty. It needs to be done by professionals, people who are trained, and by expert, not by popularity. You can't have the high school, what do you call it? The playground in high school determining whether someone is guilty or innocent, the way that bullies do, like in a classroom. It needs to be determined by all sorts of experts. Someone has been murdered. You don't decide. The schoolyard bully doesn't decide whether someone they like or not should be guilty or innocent. It should be determined by Lady Justice with a blindfold over her eyes, right? Unbiased, fair, and based on facts and evidence and the law, right? Do you guys feel as strongly about it as I do? Because I really do feel strongly about it. So, the internet does have quite a lot of immunity, and that needs to be challenged, and it also needs to be adjusted. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any rights online, just that they need to be amended. Then she goes on to say, we now know that was an overly simple view. I agree. Internet immunity till the end of time is definitely overly simple. And if they don't moderate and monitor the content, that's really all we're talking about. Extreme content needs to be identified, recognized, and dealt with in a certain way. You do need moderation. I've got moderators on my own channel, and they are here to deal with people who are crossing certain lines. I don't think anyone would argue that that's not reasonable, right? It's moderating and monitoring content. And I think it's easy to look at that and say, oh, this is all about control, right? But the flip side of it is if you say, well, there should be no control for social media, freedom of speech, right? Well, then who controls who? Then do you say social media can control political outcomes? Social media can control the outcomes of court cases. When something happens, let's say two people are in a dispute. Let's say it's a civil dispute. Let's say it's between an insurer and the insured. Can both of those go into social media and kind of character assassinate somebody else? Can they? And then social media decides what happens. Well, what if technically, legally, the one person is actually right, legally right? Can you use social media in that way? I don't think that's right. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. So there does need to be some controls on just the basic thing. Are you allowed to tell lies on social media? Are you allowed to manipulate? Are you allowed to inflame people with things like shock value? There's a YouTuber who said that he had a recording of the Idaho 4 murders, like literally of the crime taking place. Well, should you be allowed to do that? Should you be allowed to make money out of deceiving people? And she says here, and it's so true, it's not just the social and psychological effects, it's real life. Should our real lives be changed? Should our real lives be affected by deception? Because that's literally what is happening. At a very high level, at political level, people's opinions are being altered. But there are also social and psychological effects. Your community becomes maybe less trusting. You become a more anxious person. Should that be allowed? You are being gaslit literally by social media. You don't know what's true and what's not. Should that be allowed? Think about an algorithm for good, where you have an algorithm that basically, like you get self-driving cars, and I've been in one. in a Tesla that drives you in a way that's perhaps safer than the safest driver, arguably. Can you imagine if you had AI that is about telling you the truth? Think about just how incredible that could be in the field of true crime. Like, what does AI say about the reality of let's say the John Benet Ramsey case? What does AI in an indifferent, in a unbiased, there's no agenda. There's simply, if you take all the information, where does it take you? And beyond that, other things. What's really happening with our climate? What's really happening with regard to that? What are the real stats with regard to crimes taking place? What's really happening with immigration? What is reality? If you had AI that's sort of geared to helping us figure out what is really happening in the real world, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be great? Because it seems like you can't really rely on most people to deliver on that brief. Do you agree? You literally can't let people do that because most people don't. Most people won't, because there's a cheaper and easier way of doing it. Anyway, Clinton said that let's just read it there. Clinton said that social media companies should have their immunity stripped so guardrails could be implemented. That doesn't mean that you don't have social media. It just means that there needs to be stricter application of information, and that you can't lie and bullshit willy-nilly. Wouldn't it be a better world if there's less bullshit in it? She said that cell phones should be restricted in schools. Can I have a show of hands here? By the way, I've taught as well. Can I have a show of hands here who would approve that? Who would like to see cell phones restricted in schools? And I really like what she says here. She says, an effort has been approved by several states in the US. And you might say, oh no, that's horrible control. Stop taking control of me. I want access to my cell phone. Really? In a school setting, when you're supposed to be studying, should you be on social media when you should be studying, right? And we know what the answer is. We know what I want, right? What is best for a person compared to what is right, right? Kind of thing. I think it's best for me that I have a phone, but is that the right decision here? Individual school districts in various states have adopted policies banning or limiting cell phone use during school hours. And that's kind of where I say, you might say you should never control information. It should be the First Amendment, freedom of speech. No, it's not an unlimited right. Like, be practical about it. Yes, it is an important right. Yes, it should be protected, but it shouldn't have unlimited. It shouldn't become a tyranny of its own, where the right to have information in your hand prevents a teacher from actually teaching you. I mean, who's in control now? Like, who's blocking out the ability of a teacher to teach? Well, actually, the social media platform. Actually, this device that is interfering with this whole process. How much? I mean, just think about this in a general sense. How much is cell phone use and social media simply interfering with life, with being alive, with getting up and going for a walk with your dog, which I'm about to do, right? The sun's actually coming up here. How much is social media literally not enhancing life, but interfering with it? It's actually undermining it. And so isn't it about time that we do have some curbs and controls? Isn't it something that is going to be for our own good? It's almost like we need to be our own parents. We need to be our own, we need to manage our own inner child in a way that's life affirming, right? Not just giving into kind of addiction. Anyway, she goes on to say, take phones out of schools. She says, I'm so happy to see schools beginning to do that, where the kids turn their phone in when they walk in the door. And then she says this, guess what? Kids are paying better attention in class. And I think the same thing would happen. Just let's focus on the true crime community. Can you imagine if you start sorting out the bullshit that's in true crime? You start putting in some guardrails, and you start getting the bullshit and the bullshitters out of true crime. You're going to start having people that are going to be able to pay attention better to what's really going on around them. The more bullshit you take out of your headspace, the more reality comes in its place, and real life and real people, right? And isn't that better? Isn't that a better world to live in, right? And so look what she says here. So once you put in these guardrails, kids are paying better attention. They are talking to each other in the lunchroom, things that used to be part of our daily life when you were a child at school. And yeah, so I won't read the rest of that. But what do you guys think of that? I think at the very least, this conversation needs to start. It needs to start gathering momentum. I really think it's well past its sell-by date, actually, but I really do think it needs to be part of it needs to be the number one political issue, actually. But the reason why it isn't is I don't know if it would be very popular. Someone telling you you can't have that on your phone, not going to be very popular. It's the right thing to do, but is it best for me? And we're not very good at that. We're not very good at self-discipline. I did a triathlon on Saturday and I really suffered. And when I came out the other side, it's quite simple. If you want to have a better race, you need more self-discipline. The same applies to life. And none of that's nice to hear. Train harder, eat better, don't indulge here, don't do that, put more effort in. None of us really want to hear that. But if you want a better race, if you want a better experience, you do need to make some of those sacrifices. And I don't think social media can be a sacrifice-free zone, a rules-free zone, the wild, wild west. I was driving recently, and I'm telling you, driving in South Africa compared to driving in America, it literally is like the Wild West here. I can't tell you all the things, all the little permutations of things you've got to watch out for. I remember being so afraid to drive in America, and when I did drive, like the speed limit was much lower. People obey the speed limit. The cars are roadworthy. People basically obey the law. What a pleasure. What a pleasure. And I can't really take you into the South African driving experience. Maybe I should do it at some point, but that is basically an analogy for social media. It shouldn't be so dangerous. There needs to be more law enforcement, in a sense, regulating the traffic. Otherwise, people take chances, right? Okay. Wow, an hour and a half. It's definitely a lot longer than I meant, but I did wanna go off on this particular tangent. I think I'm gonna end off.
Thank you so much.
By playing you guys a clip from. Am I going to do it? Let's just see where it is. You guys?
They've done it again. Climate activists have thrown soup over Vincent van Gogh's sunflowers painting in London. 3 protesters from Just Stop Oil tossed the tomato soup over sunflowers 1889 and sunflowers 1888 on Friday. It happened just an hour after 2 others were sentenced.
Okay, so what you're actually seeing there is a copycat version of what had happened previously, where they threw soup over these Van Gogh artworks. On the day, so something like the day that the initial offenders were sentenced to 2 years, these other people came and did exactly the same thing. And that's why what's happening here is the court of public opinion trumping the actual court. Is that acceptable? So that's been the result. And you're seeing more and more of it. Of this is what is more important, the actual court or the court of public opinion? Do you want the actual court to be the court of public opinion? So in other words, should the new court of the future be things like throwing soup at expensive paintings, and then you shock or kind of blackmail people, you force people into making changes in that sense? Is that the way to have proper conversations in future? I mean, what's really going on here is you're damaging something, you're shocking someone into you're triggering someone into doing something. Is that the best, most efficient way of getting the outcome that you want? Now you might say, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with it. But imagine if politicians do that. Politicians also damage something, destroy something in order to make a point in the court of public opinion. Can you see where all of this takes you? It takes you to catastrophe. We need to think in a more civilized way. And what I think social media is doing is it's actually making us more like tribes and making us think in a very reptilian way. Either you're with me or you're against me. Either it's on or it's off. And that's not how we need to think. We need to think in a more integrated fashion and in a way where there's some compromise. And we don't like doing that, but that is how we became a democracy. That is how civilization happened. I don't know if any of you have watched that series. It's so good, The Last Kingdom. You know how civilization actually started, and the first country came together was where people decided we speak different languages. You know, you had Saxons and Celts, you had the Norse and the folks from Britain, and they decided, you know what, if we come together and we believe the same thing, we don't have to keep killing each other, like building castles and fighting each other with swords and things. We can live in the same country, and we can write down laws, and we although we're very different, we can both say, I respect the law, and then through that we respect one another. And now, almost 1,000 years later, it seems like we're devolving back to, I'm me, and you need to respect my heritage and whatever, and you are you, and so I'm at war with you. Do you know where that ends up? It ends up with castles and battles, and us versus them, and not democracy, not civilization, feudalism. And go and read your history on that period. There was a period where the whole of Europe was locked in feudal combat for hundreds of years. And the amount of bloodshed in that is unbelievable. The whole development of civilization doesn't go anywhere because people are just bickering. It's just this castle fighting against that castle, and then this one's destroyed, then another one comes. And it's basically, if you are not me, then it's me versus you. I would like to think we've come some way since then, but social media is taking us back to that. This is the feudalism of social media. It's just not very civilized, right? It's just not very civilized. And this whole thing of throwing soup on a painting, you know, that painting isn't just a painting. It represents, in a way, culture. It represents civilization. Throwing soup on that as a way to get something done isn't the way to deal with it. You need to create something new. You need to find a way to create dialogue. And I think social media, in a way, is the killer of dialogue. Where real people in the real world talk to one another, listen to one another, have conversations with one another. Do you guys agree? Okay, so that was a bit of a rant at the end, but I do think it was an important one. Thanks a lot for you guys being here. If you guys haven't watched my latest video on Pineapple Gate, make sure you do. I do think it's really interesting. I'm going to make one more video on Pineapple Gate, then I'm kind of done with that. And it's really going to address the whole thing in a way that that I think no one has actually thought about. So I've dealt with all of the context and all of the issues, but I'm going to basically draw a line through all of it in the next video on that. And again, it just shows the importance of thinking critically, just how easy it is to miss the most important thing. Then something else I'm quite excited to deal with again on the Ramsey case is really amnesia. You know, it's 28 years later, and we are told now about events then, and not in an accurate way. There is a lot of historic revisionism, right? And so what I want to do is I want to take you to Anne Bardak, who wrote such an excellent article. I think it's called, is it Innocence Lost in Vanity Fair? But have her talk about what it was like in 1997. What was the aftermath? What was the reality in terms of the aftermath of the Ramsey case? And there's so much to deal with. I mean, it's going to be really interesting. I'm still trying to figure out how to do it. But one of the really interesting things that comes out of that discussion is, how did the Ramsey ransom note actually come? How was it actually released to the public? And I think when you go back in time and you just look at that part, it's also quite fascinating. I remember in the Madeleine McCann case, what was also fascinating was the first photo released of Madeleine wasn't really the Madeleine of prior deluge. It was like a Madeleine that was about a year younger, her hair was shorter, and it was like brown. Why on earth, if you're looking for someone, would you release a photo of her that doesn't look like her? Why wouldn't you release a photo taken of her at that holiday? If you didn't want Madeleine to be found, it would make sense to put out a photo of her that doesn't look like her. A Madeleine with brown hair and short hair, and she looks like she's maybe 2 years old, right? Why didn't they just put out the photos of her? They took photos of her in prior deluge. Why not, like the one by the swimming pool? Why not use one of those photos? Why didn't that happen? And we often don't think about those questions in hindsight because we're not going through it chronologically. But you need to track the story in real time, chronologically, to understand all the manipulation and how the people who are trying to cover things up basically realize, wow, the public are very receptive to that. We'll make that our story. Wow, the public are really receptive to that. Let's make that our story. And if you think in the Ramsey case, it started off being an insider, right? I think someone, an insider committed this crime. What is the current belief today? Who committed the crime today? Is it an insider? Well, Gary Oliva is not an insider. Who are some of the latest suspects in the John Benet Ramsey case? It's not an insider. So can you see how that story's evolved? Something else you guys don't know, but I want to deal with it properly in a separate video. But Amanda Knox is bringing out a book called Free. I find that very interesting because the fact that that book is coming out quite soon means that she's already written the book, right? The book's already been written. So I'm pretty sure that she wrote the book to coincide with what she expected to be her acquittal with the slander charge with Patrick Lumumba. And instead of being acquitted, she was reconvicted, which now makes the writing of this book quite interesting, quite ironic. But it's almost like, regardless of that, I'm free, I've been vindicated, and I'm celebrating my new lease on life. I wonder whether that book's going to have any acknowledgement that she was reconvicted. I just wonder. It would be interesting. Okay, let's have a look at some of your comments. Then I'm going to get out of here. Thanks for the super chat, Boo Sheet. Thanks a lot for that. Well, what she does for a living is she's got a podcast, and she's basically an activist for the wrongfully convicted. And I think she charges money to give lectures or speeches. Keith Carnival, good to see you here. Yeah, no, I think so as well. Any of the Van Gogh letters folk, have any of you guys watched my movie recommendation that I made the other day? Remember I said you should watch that animated Puss in Boots, narrated by Antonio Banderas, really narrated very well. Just got a really good there's a very deep symbolic meaning behind that story that I really appreciated. Any of you gone? What did you think, Yvonne? I thought the animation quality was really, really good. Like, it was sketched very, very well. What did you think? Chelsea says I was going to but got busy. We'll watch next weekend. Okay. Yeah, I'm glad you liked it. I hope it was interesting. It's just really interesting how they bring in this death anxiety and how you've got to sort of cope with it, and how other people have got to cope with your ability to cope with it or not cope with it. It's all done quite well. Yeah, it's also very good, very good. Okay, well, that's it from me. I'm going to take my dog for a walk. You guys have a good night's sleep. Think about what I've said about guardrails, and just keep an eye out when you're consuming social media. What is acceptable? What shouldn't be acceptable? Why isn't it acceptable? Think about that. What's next? What's next for the Watts case? Not sure. What do you want to be next? Just Chelsea, thanks very much for being here. You're so reliable. I really do appreciate it. I know Iceland was here. I don't know if you're still here, because I know you're on the other side of the country. But if you're still here, thanks as well. Well, Yvonne says, my 19-year-old daughter didn't know how to turn on an old radio. I was astounded. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining me. I'm glad that I've trimmed down the length of this. I really don't want to do more than 90 minutes. I'm going to make it a goal to discipline the narration for the next crime news update next Monday under 1 hour. Let's try and keep it there. I do sometimes think it's necessary to expand on certain issues that are worth talking about in a sort of unrestricted way, like that certain ideas need to be fleshed out that we don't often talk about. So that's what I made room for in this live stream. Okay, guys, take care, and I'll see you guys next time. Ciao.